Welcome to what we're going to colloquially call the network class. The goal here, it's going to go for about 5 weeks. The basic goal here is to, when I got here a couple years ago, I knew absolutely nothing about anything, and a lot of folks are probably in the same position, at least anything about anything in healthcare. And so my goal is to download everything that I've sort of figured out, which ain't that much, but it's something, about healthcare to all of you. And the idea basically being so we can take all of you folks who are very smart people from outside of healthcare and make sure you can quickly become impactful in your business. The goal, I think the topics are going to go through very basics of what healthcare is, sort of like what is a payer, what is a provider, what are the types of these things, just the landscape of healthcare. We're going to go through how an insurance company actually works, so like what is utilization management, what are complaints and disputes, what is eligibility, what is enrollment, like what are these things, how do we work, how do we pay claims, blah, blah. We're going to understand our networks and our markets, so how do we think about building networks, how do we think about assessing markets, sort of that type of thing, narrow networks, etc. We'll hit contracting and negotiations, so what do we do in those things, what are the terms, what is Medicare groupers, what are inpatient and outpatient rates, how do we think through all of this stuff. And then the last part is what is the total cost of care, how do we think about managing healthcare costs, how can we impact that, etc. So that's the high level, so it'll be 5 weeks. I just went through about 5 topics. That'll basically be what we do. Each week there will be a facts class and then a concepts class. The basic facts class will be me just throwing a bunch of information at you. There'll probably also be some readings, which we're compiling and putting together. The idea is just there's a lot of stuff to know. Then the second class, after that there will be discussion questions, which I encourage you guys to think about, talk to each other, and then after you talk to each other, sort of then pick off some experienced people to talk with them, and then we'll get in a room and talk about them. The idea is basically, okay, it's one thing to know the details of exactly how we do Medicare adjustment factors in our contracting. It's another thing to think about how does that impact a negotiation and how might you actually think about using that information to help us get what we want. And so the other one is very much a more applied and how do I think through solving these puzzle sorts of things. I would say the other thing about this is that this class, at least its initial version, will be a little bit more focused around, it will be applicable for everyone, but will be a little more focused on some of the account management, provider partnerships, and contracting types of things, which I think have the greatest richness of exactly how to deal with healthcare entities. Analytics will be very useful across the board in that stuff, and care routing also uses some of this across the board. But the goal right now is, for example, to hit all of our provider services inbound conversations and like how you literally work with an office or whatever. So it's a little more focused around partnerships and contracting, but it will be useful across the board. Questions? Good. And so just in terms of time commitment, it will just be 2 classes per week. That'll go an hour. We may extend them to 90 minutes. And then there'll be a few hours of discussions and readings and that sort of thing. Okay? In both, certainly in the concepts class, but also in the facts class, just stop me, ask your questions. I know we're video recording, but just take me off whatever direction. It's mostly I'm here for you folks. We're recording this for posterity so that I don't have to do this with every new hire, particularly as we get new hires every month or whatever. We can just sort of put them on this stuff, and we'll probably do the concepts class like quarterly or something like that. Okay, and then the final thing I would say, this is, as you can tell with getting the video set up, etc., a bit of a novel experiment, and so bear with me, be patient, and vice versa, and we will get through. That's it.
Thank you.
Okay? Good? Okay. All right, so concepts class, or rather facts class number 1. So what we're going to cover today is the healthcare landscape. What is out there? What do we, who are the entities that we interact with? How do we interact with them? What is the healthcare world at Ireland? Okay, so what are the big entities when you think about healthcare? How's the U.S. healthcare system organized?
Should we just kind of shout them out?
Yep.
Insurance companies.
Okay, great. Insurance companies.
Medicare, Medicaid, so the government.
Government.
Providers.
So what's the relationship between Medicare, Medicaid, and providers and insurance companies?
There's like support.
So the payers and the providers.
Right, so that's typically how we organize it, is that there's the payers or insurance companies, and then the providers of healthcare. And then who else is left in there?
People who actually
Members, right? So you got this triangle where there's the payers, providers, members, and basically that's what we got. And those three parties make up the healthcare system at a high level. There's regulators and there's other actors that we have to deal with, but at a high level, that's sort of how the market comes together. And obviously, just to reiterate, the providers provide the care. They are the hospitals, the physicians, all of that stuff. The payers then pay for it on behalf of the members, where the members have some financial responsibility, though usually a minority of it. Our plans typically go from sort of bronze and catastrophic, which is like about half of the total cost, bronze or less, bronze, which is about 60 or 70%, silver is about 70 or 80%, and gold's like 80 to 90, platinum like 90% of healthcare costs expected that we cover. So somewhere in there, that's about what it, something like 80% of the healthcare costs of the insured are paid for by the insurance companies, by the payers. Okay, now, so the other thing I will do is, if this is all the payers in the country, let's first which markets is Oscar in? Of the individual and small business, right? And then we're talking about Medicare Advantage. Maybe we're working on it. How big is individual? If of all in the country?
Relatively small portion.
Yeah, it's like 10%, something like that, even a little less, 7 or 8%, something like that. And small group is a little bigger than that, but also maybe like another 10%. Large group is all the businesses is another 20 to 30% or so. So label these individual, small group, large group, and then it's going to be a little bit more like this. What's left?
Medicare, Medicaid.
Yep, so another 25% or so is Medicare. And what is MA, Medicare Advantage? What is that? Anybody know?
A different tier of Medicare exclusion.
Yeah, essentially what Medicare Advantage is it's a subset of Medicare. The two classes being Medicare Fee-for-Service, which is the traditional program, and Medicare Advantage, which is MA. Basically, what the government has done is decide to say, we can, rather than pay for everything, we can actually auction off, to a certain degree, the Medicare payments, give them to insurance companies, who will then offer directly to consumers, an individualized market, a product, and then that will incentivize, it's sort of a public-private partnership, it will the insurance companies will be incentivized to lower the cost, basically, and then both the consumers, the government, and the insurance companies all get to split some of the value added that everybody gives. So the insurance companies make money by selling the plans and keeping the costs down. The government benefits from that because they get to keep the costs down. And then the consumer also gets it, they actually consume it in the form of cool perks that the insurance companies give them, etc. And that's basically it. And I think, and I'm not 100% sure here, but I think it's about like 65% fee-for-service and 35% MA, where MA is growing relative to Medicare. And then you've got Medicaid, which is a little smaller, another, my pie's not going to fully add up here, but Medicaid, and what is Medicaid?
Low income?
Yep. And then the rest, you would say, is everything between uninsured, which, VA, military, a bunch of other things like that, a bunch of other stuff. Okay, so that is basically the market the markets in which we are in. So you think about these and this, and over time maybe we'll do large group, although not yet. Yes.
So that pie represents the entire population of the country?
Yes. Yes.
Got it.
Okay, so that's basically what payers are. So now, okay, let's go to providers for a second. There's going to be a lot here. Well, actually, in the payers thing. So who are the big, a couple. So this is typically known, mostly, and maybe sometimes people refer to individual as well, as commercial. That's just an AKA for that. Sometimes people meanly include individual in that, sometimes they don't. It's not particularly clear. Interestingly, the rates that we negotiate with hospitals, that all these parties negotiate with hospitals, are very different, where Medicaid tends to be very, very low. It's set by the government, pretty much. Medicare is pretty low. Basically, this is below cost for providers. This is more or less at cost for providers. And then these are where all the profit comes from. And individual is somewhere in the middle of those things. And largely because the hospitals and the providers are more or less often mandated to take this care, they know they can't get it, and the prices are sort of set, they know they can't get a very good deal on it. And then they basically, all of the profits for all of the hospitals come from the commercial policies. So those rates tend to be much higher. And we'll get into this later in subsequent classes, but when you quote, often one way of pricing care is to quote it as a percentage of what Medicare costs. And so you have 100% of Medicare is exactly what Medicare costs, 150% of Medicare would be 150% of Medicare, etc. Okay, good. So now, let's go and so who are the big insurance companies?
Oxford.
Anthem, United, Anthem.
Yeah, so there's basically four that make up the vast majority. Anthem, which owns Blue Cross, Blue Shield, all of those. United, which owns Oxford and a bunch of other brand names. Humana and Cigna. And I think together they make up something like 80% of the market share of the commercial and MA market. There are other plans that are either small, regional, local plans. There are these notions of co-ops, which got created for the individual markets, many of whom are going out of business. So there are some other individual, like smaller insurers, but the vast majority of them, it's sort of a very oligopolical, if that's the right word. So it's an oligopoly of these four places. Largely, I think, because there have been big synergies, just similar to banking, in what we'll talk about in subsequent classes, but it tends to be more advantageous to have a greater market share. You can drive better contracts, et cetera, so that if there's if there's 10 different insurance companies, typically one will buy several of the others, up to the point at which the regulators get involved and say, no, that's antitrust, which is actually what you saw recently when those four insurance companies tried to merge the two and the regulators blocked it.
Did I hear you correctly, and it just occurred to me, when you previously said that under Medicare Advantage, insurance companies are making money, patients are saving, government's saving, but that the providers are actually not making any money, they're just selling at cost?
on Medicare.
on Medicare.
On Medicare and Medicaid. So if you just took a hospital, typically there's obviously wide variation. You take the average hospital and you say you can no longer see individual small group and large group members, they probably would not, they don't make money on anybody else. If you look at their costs, if everybody paid them Medicare, they would not make any money. They may even lose a little bit. And if everybody paid them Medicaid, they would lose a lot of money. You have very different incentives as a provider depending on how your contract is structured. And you can structure a contract in pretty much all of these however you want. Medicare Fee-for-Service is the government paying you and they have a certain contract and that's just the contract. But on all of these, anywhere it's just a negotiation, and that's what Oscar can do, and any of the plans can say, hey, what if we structured it this way or that way? And you create very different incentives for the providers given different contract structures. And that's a lot of the stuff we have to think through and work through with providers. Okay. All right, so that is the payer landscape. Now let's go to providers. So what are the different types of providers that are out there? Yeah, what else?
Family practice,
Say that again.
family practices, small provider offices.
Okay, so we got provider offices.
Sort of standardized outpatient type services like maybe dialysis.
We got dialysis. What else? What else gives you healthcare?
That's all about.
Yeah, you may have vendors, which we talked about, and then maybe dental.
I guess pharmacy would be included inside of that.
Pharmacy is a thing.
Physical therapy chains.
Yeah. So,
Clinics.
clinic, PT, etc. So if we group these up, the way that we do them is that there's physicians, there are facilities, and pharmacy. And I'm going to erase this for 1 second, and I'll get back to these in a second. So the physicians are basically are the doctors. You probably also put registered nurses in there, but the people that do the stuff. The facilities is the place that you go to do the stuff. Often they have employees literally working there, so you go to the MRI clinic and you get a, usually they don't charge you separately for the MRI technician versus the machine. We just mean the summation of those two. And so when we say facilities, we do mean that there are some people there working. So it's not strictly only people and facilities, but anyway, that's the basic distinction. And then you've got pharmacy, which is a separate beast. And when we get a claim, we get different claims for these things. Particularly, we get a physician claim and a facility claim. So when you go to the hospital and you break your arm and you need a surgeon to come in and put it in the right spot, the surgeon will send us a bill and the hospital will send us a bill. And that depends exactly what you do. As I said, when you go to the MRI, you only get a facility claim, facility bill. Okay, those are sort of separate things. And then the pie here looks basically like, if this is all of your health insurance costs, about 30 or so percent is the physicians. About 40% or so is the facilities. And 20% and growing or so is pharma. So, that's, I'm going to draw it like this. Whatever. Okay. And what's
procedure?
What's that?
The
Of
cost.
dollars. Of you take like our spending, and what's left here?
You said this was health insurance costs?
Of like what our members pay. Like our members give us $400 a month.
So,
What's left?
SG&A, profit.
Right, what we call admin. So from our perspective, we need to charge some money to pay for us all to sit in this room right now, et cetera. And so typically this is, 10 to 15% or something like that, depending on which market and whatever. Some can go up to 20.
Isn't there some crazy stat where it's like every household pays like on average per year like $1,000 of just administrative costs for healthcare or something?
That's about right. Like, meaning, I think average per capita spend on healthcare is probably like something like $7,000. Maybe a little higher than that, maybe $8,000. And if you took a 15% expense, you then get about $1,000. Which so that is true. Okay. So that is that. So then, one thing related to that I think we should hit is the notion of, which ties right to that, is the notion of a medical loss ratio. This is a more basic concept, which is the difference between what we charge our members and what we end up paying in healthcare costs is a medical loss ratio. So if we charge $400 and our medical costs are only $350, the difference between those is that $50. Our medical loss ratio would be $350 divided by 400, which you can do your math. I don't know what exactly that is, 7/8, which is 86%, something like that. And we would express it as 86%. So anything less than 100 is good for things. Less than 100 is more good. Things the higher you get, the worse. The lower you get, the better from our perspective. And when we then price our plans, there's a thing we price for certain admin. Like if we have an MLR of 86%, it means the admin that we gained was the remainder, which is 14, right? And so we can price for certain admin, and we ended up, so there's what we priced for, and then there's what we end up getting. Yeah? Okay. Basics. Next. So, physicians. So, can you name some different types of physicians? Who here has been to a physician this year? Anybody? Everybody? Great. You're a healthy person, no physician claimers? So what are the types of physicians that you go see?
Primary care.
So primary care, call those a PCP.
Specialists, but they're on.
Specialists, cardiologists, what's that?
Pediatrician.
Pediatrician actually goes here. Typically, when you say primary care, it's sort of the pediatrician is a sort of, call that a family doctor, like a family practice. And so you have one for adult and you have one for children. The children is pediatrics. There's also geriatricians, which is the same thing for an old person. Specialists, there's cardiologists, ophthalmologists, orthopedists, urologists, nephrologists, neurologists, etc.
Surgeons. Would surgeons be included?
What's that?
Surgeons.
Surgeons. There's general surgeons. Let's see. The surgeons is sort of a subset. There's orthopedic surgeons. There's general surgeons. There's oncology surgeons. There's et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
Some things are partial surgeons, like ear, nose, and throat doctors, or partially surgeons, partially not surgeons, et cetera. So when we do this, actually, there's we have about 300 or so physician specialties, and there's a bit of like a called a directed graph, but it's basically a hierarchy of how they all work. And so when you go into, let's say, you might have surgeons. Then you might have, subset of that is orthopedic surgeons. And then you have the knee surgeon, then you have the hip surgeon, then you have the foot surgeon, etc. And each one has its own, is its own specialty, meaning that you can only go to that, if you need a very particular procedure, you need to go to the right type of specialists. And so we've got a whole a lot of sort of data science and data governance work to make sure we have that list right. And we say, okay, well, what's the difference between a podiatrist and a foot and ankle surgeon? Is there a difference, right? And you have to actually answer those questions. That becomes very valuable when we start to look at the cost of and start ranking our doctors. Because if a podiatrist is different than a foot and ankle surgeon, if they're the same thing, you might say, okay, we can rank them all together. But if one happens to do a lot more surgeries and one happens to do a lot more non-surgical treatment, then you might see a huge difference in cost for no other reason other than they do different stuff. Generally, in the insurance world, people only have, we have about, across physician facilities, et cetera, we have like almost 500 different specialties. Generally, an insurance company would have like 40 or 50. And the thing that we needed to really get that real granularity. So when you see how some of our dashboards and metrics and cost scores, et cetera, they're all at that very granular level, which is critical for us to make sure, A, we have enough of every doctor in the network. So you can't just say I have 10 orthopedists, because if one of them can't fix your hip, then you got a problem, right? So we went to, to make sure we have enough to assess the quality relative to each other, and also to find the right doctor for members. Okay, you need this very particular type of vocal fold surgeon, or ear surgeon, or whatever it is.
Is the reason that larger insurance companies don't have as many categories is because they tend to have broader networks, and so they figure it's out there and they just throw it onto the patient to figure out where to go, or let the doctors to guide them?
Yeah, they don't have really any one of those three business needs. One is when we build networks, we want to really curate them, and so we're trying to look for only the best ones, and so when you do that, you have to be very confident you have enough of everything. So that's one reason why. The other is we, somewhat related, they don't do anything related to ranking doctors or thinking that through typically, or not anything, but anything substantive. And then the third one is care routing, where we are much more engaged in people's lives in care routing, and so we need to know who these types of doctors are in a way that they can just say, I don't know, here's a list of orthopedists, go. So this breaks down then, so that's physicians. The other thing to think about is we have something called hospital-based physicians, or HBPs. A hospital-based physician is one that only works at a hospital. The basic differentiator there, and versus all the others, or there's not a great word we have, but just other physicians, standard physicians, are ones that you would say like, ow, my X hurts, I need to go see this person. A hospital-based physician, you just get when you get there. Has anybody had surgery? Ever had a surgery? No. Well, if you get surgery, you go and you're going to go see your orthopedist, you go sit down, and then this other random doctor comes in, he says, hi, I'm the anesthesiologist, I'll be taking care of you today. And you're like, who are you? I haven't seen you, I don't know who you are. And he's like, well, I'm going to, basically put a mask on your face and make sure you're, put you to bed. That doctor is assigned by the hospital to your surgery, given when your surgery was. And so you don't get to choose that anesthesiologist, it just comes along with the hospital. However, it is not included for billing and other purposes. You get a bill from that anesthesiologist, whether you like it or not. And so whether you know it or not. And so when that person will be sending you a bill at the end of the day. As distinct from perhaps the nurse or the person checking you in at the hospital is not going to send you a separate bill. That anesthesiologist or the person that does your pathology or your radiology or the emergency room doctor or whatever is separate, is employed by a different company and is just chilling at the hospital. Basically, there's an agreement between that physician group and the hospital that they will staff for those hours, and therefore they can send you a bill. Those are called hospital-based physicians. As you might imagine, the negotiation of those is very different, because if that hospital is in network, we really, really want to get that hospital-based physician group. Whereas if there's 10 orthopedists in town, we can choose the ones we want. So hospital-based comes with the facility. Okay? Good. All right, so facilities.
Sorry, you were saying,
yeah.
so for the people that, like the anesthesiologists, we want to include those in our network, or, sorry?
Right, ideally we do, because if you go, like, playing that forward, what happens if I get my knee surgery and we don't have the anesthesiologist in the network? What happens?
Then the customer would out of pocket having to pay for.
Right, they still send the bill.
Right.
And, which we'll get to in certain classes, the way that insurance works is the providers send very, very high bills, and then we have a negotiated rate that's less than that. And so they'll send me like a $20,000 bill for my anesthesiology. I'll get that bill. There's no negotiated rate. I'll probably freak out. And Oscar will probably either deny the claim or, like that sort of thing. We don't actually, it all depends state by state, whether we have to pay it or not and how we pay it and whatever. But it's generally a bad experience for everybody, both the member, for us, and for the provider to not have a deal in place.
Is it pretty standard to include, or do the people change often, like kind of hop around from hospital to hospital?
They tend not to change because it's tend to be staffed and there's hours or whatever. The individual doctors can change, but the group does not change.
Got it.
But those groups are really annoying because they know they have you, whatever.
Is there a world where, if we're large enough in a given market like New York City, where we can contract with those anesthesiologists directly? And is there any benefit?
That's what we do. So we direct the contract with those anesthesiology groups. So there's, we have probably 30 or 40 different anesthesiology groups that we contract with in the greater New York area, thus employing hundreds and hundreds of anesthesiologists.
So if there's a surgery scheduled, the hospital coordinates directly with them, or do we take that on?
We don't do any coordination. We just, at the beginning of the contracting process, we say, hey, we're going to go to, HCA's hospital in Nashville. They give us the list of all the doctor groups that work in their hospital. We then, 6 months in advance, call them up and say, hey, we're coming to town, we have a deal with HCA. We'd really like to get a contract with you because we'll be working together. And then ideally we get that contract agreed to, and then the hospital we don't have to do anything. You get your knee surgery scheduled, it's all done, they sign an anesthesiologist, the anesthesiologist sends us a claim, we know it's from the group that we signed up with, boom, we're done.
But we're not allowed to go to groups that already don't have a deal in place with the hospital? Like any group?
No, we can't staff it ourselves.
Anesthesiologist comes in for your specific surgery.
No. We can't go to like the bullpen. We've tried, creative people have tried to do things like that, and it's crazy.
Do we have any facility partnerships in place where we don't have contracts with those like vendor groups?
Yes.
And how do we deal with those costs?
I'd use the word vendor separate, hospital
Sorry. Hospital-based physicians.
Yes. So for example, when we set up the San Antonio network in 2016, this was a huge source of pain where we didn't even know this was a thing we had to do. We just, hey, here we go. And then our members were getting all these thousands, literally thousands of bills, hundreds of bills a month. Every surgery was like, here's a $10,000 bill, and members freaked out. And then we had to go back and just negotiate all those contracts, deal with all the old claims, make things right, call members, whatever. So it is, and to a certain degree, we have a lot, we probably hit about our goal is to generally hit about 90% because you don't want to give in to everybody because a lot of them are really pain in the neck groups who have monopolies and really drive a hard bargain, and at a certain degree, you want a healthy degree of tension there. Because if all the providers are happy, then it probably means you paid too much. So, and then these are details, but we set ourselves up to deal with some of that tension operationally and to deal with, okay, what happens if a member happens to get that one group? How do we deal with that? How do we negotiate with that group? Get that all done, make sure the member feels good, etc. And we've actually ended up, so we went from not signing these things to then just paying whatever they wanted. And then this year, we basically have a much more thoughtful strategy on that, and we've ended up saving about 5% of medical costs, literally just from dealing with this and similar types of things.
What's the one-line summary of the strategy?
offer to pay them something low and aggressive, and if they don't take it, know all of your recourse, regulatory and otherwise. Okay, so that's hospital-based physicians. Facilities, so facilities, the big thing that we have in the facilities camp is hospitals. And those are also known as acute facilities, so if somebody or acute care facilities. So if somebody says, can you send me our acute care contract, they mean hospital contract. And then they're basically ancillaries, of which typically people would call labs and radiology the big ones, also known as imaging. And then there's other things such as post-acute care, like what happens to you after you get out of the hospital, like, okay, now I need a nursing facility, or I need a long-term acute care facility, etc. And then there's other stuff in here as well, like your urgent care centers. I don't know, there's probably some other random stuff, like we might have things like a ambulatory surgery center, a birthing center, and we go on and on. And just like there's like 300 and some or so things here, there's like 100 and something things there. And so you think imaging centers, there's the place where you get your mammography, the place where you get your bone scan, the place where you get your MRI, the place where you get your open MRI, blah, blah, blah. And each one of those has a different set of services that they perform.
Do clinics fall into that too? How do you get your flu shot, or is that?
So clinics, it depends what you mean by that. Yes, generally, but there's so many different. There's family planning clinic where you get a very different set of service done than the urgent care clinic, which is different than the birthing clinic and whatever. So clinic is very broad. Clinic is sort of like saying surgeon. So anyway, where you get your flu shot could also be in a minute clinic, which is at the CVS. There's like a bunch of different places that could perform that thing. These tend to break down into two sets of types of facilities. One is places that you go, places where you would go to the desk and ask for a service, and the other, which is someplace where you would meet your doctor, more or less. Those are not the most elegant words, but for example, an ambulatory surgery center is a place that you would never walk into and ask for services. You would just have to meet your doctor there. It's like, okay, hi, I'm going to get a colonoscopy. I'm here at the ambulatory surgery center. Okay, great. I'll connect you with your GI doctor. Whereas in urgent care center, you can walk in and say, hi, I have the flu. Can you give me I hurt my arm. And so that just tends to be helpful when you think about what these facilities really are. Okay. And good. And then I'll hit, let's see what I hit. So do people know what I mean by independent physicians? No. So what, throughout all this stuff, there's the notion of contracting entities, what we call it internally. But it's basically like when I sign a deal with Mount Sinai, a lot of this stuff comes with it, right? So Mount Sinai brings with it a hospital, but it also has radiology centers. It also actually has some sort of urgent care centers, and it has a whole bunch of physicians, right? Those are all literally owned and employed by Mount Sinai. So Mount Sinai is a system. And when you say independent, you mean not in a system. So the healthcare landscape in this country is more and more dominated by healthcare systems. And so basically, so when we sign a deal with Mount Sinai, we get their, it's like 10 hospitals, we get their 1,000 physicians, we get a bunch of other services, their nuclear medicine facility, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so So that's one. So, and if you're a primary care doctor, you can be employed by Mount Sinai and be in the system, or you can be independent. Somewhere in the, yeah.
You can be both, like employed by a hospital system, but then also have your own private practice.
Yes. I'll get into that in just one second. Good. Good question. So in the middle, so that if there's employed and then there's independent, sort of in the middle, but we put it more towards the independent camp, is we call affiliated practices. And so there are a lot of doctors who have agreed to work with Mount Sinai, sometimes to give some contracting rights to Mount Sinai on their behalf, but their paycheck is not a Mount Sinai paycheck. And Mount Sinai doesn't like employ them. They can see business outside of Mount Sinai, etc. Those are called affiliated. And so there's a thing called an Independent Physician Association, or an IPA, which is a collection of independent physicians, often that are affiliated with a particular hospital. So that when we sign Mount Sinai, we get their employed physicians, who are the doctors who are literally owned and employed by Mount Sinai. Then we also have their IPA, their Physician Association, which is a bunch of independent practices that they've corralled that are all interested in sort of work with Mount Sinai and have some relationship to them, but are not exclusively employed by Mount Sinai. Okay, so that's the notion of an IPA. Now, yeah.
Question on that. The IPA, is that organized by the system, or is that organized by the independent physicians for the purpose of like having like a union to negotiate better rates with the hospital?
It depends. There are certain IPAs that are not system affiliated. So there's KIPA, which is the Chinese American IPA, and they're in Chinatown. It's just a bunch of doctors who largely for streamlining their contracting, like making it easy operationally, and also theoretically to sort of drive a harder bargain as a group, get together and have an IPA. So that's it. Then there's Mount Sinai, who will create their IPA. Typically they do that they do it for a bunch of reasons, but one is it allows them often to more easily contract with payers, so they can offer to us, hey, we'll give you this employed, and if you sign this one document, we'll be able to get you all these other physicians. Also, it can help with, as we get into certain sums of the value-based contracting, where they can have they can sort of contract on behalf of people for value-based care. There's some other details that help Sinai having an idea.
What's the breakdown between like independent system versus hospital systems across the physician landscape?
About, I think it's about half or 40% employed. So about 40% employed, I think, another 30% affiliated, and 20 to 30% true independent. Something like that.
And then for the independent, is it kind of like type of physician across the board, or is there a specific type of physician that's more likely to be independent versus?
Primary care has historically tended to be more independent, and specialty, particularly very sub-specific specialists, like the brain surgeon or whatever, tends to be more employed. Heart transplant surgeon, it makes sense because they're only doing surgeries at that hospital and sort of tied together. That's changing a little bit, and more primary care is getting anyway, it's changing a little bit, but that's the basic general rule.
Did that average change like in a market like in Cleveland, the clinic there? It's seems to be a very comprehensive.
It definitely is regionally variant. I think I don't have a good answer to actually what drives that variation. I haven't thought about it a ton. Anyway, it definitely varies. New York tends to have a little bit more. Smaller towns, I think, tend to have a little bit less, but I'm not 100% sure, honestly. And then to answer your question, a physician can have multiple practices or multiple offices, which is a big problem in care routing, which you know. And so a physician can be employed by Mount Sinai, but also have an independent practice. Or they can be affiliated and have an independent, or they can just have 3 offices that they work at, each of which contract separately. Complexity and mess for us when we think about network construction and also care routing, because if you sign up one doctor who's, let's say, well, if you sign up Mount Sinai, then what about if this other doctor has a separate office, and then a member goes and sees them at that other office, but they're not actually in network at that other office, and then we have a mess. So that a lot of the work we've done is trying to be like, okay, well crap, of all the doctors that we have, what are their other offices? And then can we actually sign those other offices, or do those other offices have doctors that are maybe like employed by New York Presbyterian, and then if we sign up that office, then we get the New York Presbyterian doctor, and then we create a different type of mess because whatever. So it's this very complex web, and a lot of our network construction tries to like cut that in the best way we know how. Yeah? Did you have a question?
Oh, was just making sure. So when we sign with places like Mount Sinai, usually we get everything in that system and the affiliated doctors.
Correct. And they may be different contracts.
Yeah.
So with Sinai, we actually literally have 3 separate contracts. One is the facilities, one is the physicians, and one is the IPA, different things.
Yeah.
Can I ask something just because I don't see it on there and I'm just wondering? For like ambulatory services, it's super expensive for like an ambulance to pick up someone, and the member would have to pay.
Ambulance, not ambulatory.
Sorry, an ambulance, right? So if we have Mount Sinai, their ambulances are then in network, and then that thing is covered. How does that work?
Yes, so there's different, just like anywhere else. There's system ambulance services where Mount Sinai can literally send the ambulance, and they can send us a bill, and it's in this contract, in the facility contract. And then there's freestanding ambulance services, which they can be both emergent and non-emergent, like how I got hit by a bus, and then the city sends somebody.
Right.
Or like literally you need to get transported from here to there, and you need a ventilator in the car. That's also an ambulance, and then that's non-emergency ambulance. And we have to contract with all that. There's also air ambulance, blah, blah, blah. The only other, the thing to note there, okay, so that is all of that stuff. And then pharmacy, I'll hit real quick before we wrap. Pharmacy, typically there's sort of 3 levels. There's the pharma companies, or the life science companies. There's then the wholesalers. This is, and then there's the pharmacies themselves. And then there's a pharmacy benefit manager, which helps us sort of contracts with these pharmacies and gets us the prices on all this stuff. And so we have, generally when we build networks, we focus on physicians and facilities, and then we sign a single deal with a pharmacy company, in this case CVS, to get us not only their pharmacies, but also all of the drug prices. And they actually also do what's called utilization management, which we'll get into, which is approvals and disapprovals, can you take that drug for that condition, et cetera, et cetera. And so the pharmacy thing is sort of airlifted out from how we sort of build networks, manage care, so we just signed one big contract with CVS to deal with that. Which gets to what may be the last point, which is vendors. So any place in here can have a vendor. So for example, they're dentists. We have a vendor for dentists that gives us a dental network. Because we don't want to go dentist office by dentist office, and yet we have certain areas, the same thing is true for acupuncture. It's also true for vision, optometry. Another thing, durable medical equipment, which you could maybe put under the facility camp, which is like a replacement, prosthetic or a breast pump or whatever. We have a vendor that just covers all that stuff for us. So the vendors are just anytime you sort of lease out your capabilities to somebody else in terms of building your network. Okay, so that is a lot of stuff. So basically went through payers, providers, members, went through what the different payer types are, what their markets are, who the big players are, and then went through all the providers, physicians, facilities, and pharma, and talked through basically how they organize themselves. Questions?
This might be a silly one, but on the pharmacy side, do most insurers just contract out with like CVS and have them, or do other, is that a common practice?
That's common. The big insurers, most of them have their own PBM. I don't know if all. I don't know the answer. So for example, Humana, we work with Pharmacy Benefit Manager. Humana has their own PBM. It's a big pain in the neck to do, and as you might, it requires a lot of expertise and a lot of pain in the ass to understand every single drug that's out there, what the price of it should be, who should take that drug, blah blah blah, to get the contract negotiation with the right wholesaler or pharma. It's a huge thing.
What is Express Scripts?
I don't know.
Okay.
In terms of like long-term vision for us, like I know that we used to sit on Purple's networks, we used to have someone else doing our claim services. What out of these like vendor managers in the pharmacy system do you want to see in kind of
like negotiate your prices for?
When you say you mean the insurance company?
Can I just have one combo? So the question was, which of the stuff we run in-house versus not? I mean, the general thing is we run in-house things for which we have a meaningful, like if it's part of our core business versus not. Or if there aren't any good vendors out there, like we don't have to do it internally. There tends not, on the network side, it's such a core piece of what we do related to not only do you get hosed on rates, but like we build narrow networks. It's a very key part of what we do, or at least curated networks is a better word. So you can't really extend that out to somebody. It's sort of what we do. And also related to that, all of the care routing and relationships and whatever, it also makes a huge mess if you rent out your network, or you rent your network, rent it, because the doctors don't even know you exist. And they're like, whoa, who's Oscar? Like, I don't know, what are you talking about? And so renting of the network tends to not be a great thing. It's doable in certain cases, but we tend not to like to do it. And then we just take the parts that are a huge pain in the neck, or like require sub-expertise. So like pediatric dental for our plans, it's like such an esoteric thing, you're like, ugh. And maybe we'll do that at some point, but I just don't care to right now. It's easier just to be like, okay, I don't need to build a network of pediatric dentists for some tiny fraction of the population that will ever need that, but it's a thing we have to do, so okay, let's get that out there. Other things we did out of speed, like I think our durable medical equipment, we did out of speed just to get a bunch, and I'm not sure we want to maintain that. We may want to undo that over time. Okay, so I will send out right after this, I have discussion questions. I will message those out. Our next class is a little fast, which is tomorrow.
Well, we're going to be
rescheduling.
rescheduling. Yeah, we might be rescheduling, but it'll be this week.
TBD on that, but I will send out these discussion questions, and largely the concepts class will be these discussion questions. What do you think? And I might have a couple others that are sort of curveballs on these. And then also you all bring in your questions about any of this stuff or anything that you're seeing. So that's your time to get your questions answered, to come with answers to these questions or these thoughts. And then I may ask a few other things, and that'll be a little more freewheeling discussion. Okay, huzzah, let's cut it.